Now it's time to preview an upcoming game with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're going to take a look at another Kickstarter preview. This time we're going to take a look at a game from Gamelin Games that plays 2 to 4 players, and that is Fantasy Frontier. Now, in Fantasy Frontier, each player is going to be controlling an airship here, and they're going to be navigating around a modular board that you'll create throughout the game of various terrain types in order to try and make different patterns on that board of different terrain in order to accomplish the goals of gathering some resources and building out different townships on the board, and, sometimes getting into interactions with other ships and trying to blow them out of the air. So real quick, why don't we see what you get inside of this box and how the game plays. Just a reminder that these are prototype quality components, not final components. And then at the end of the video, I'll come back here and I'll sum it all up for you. So here you can see the setup for Fantasy Frontier, set up for 2 players. Now, I've only set it up for 2 players, but you can imagine the game plays 2 to 4, so the interactions will be much the same, except for there'll be more players out on the board. In addition, I want to remind you that you're looking at prototype quality components. These are not the final components for the game. These are just representative of what the final components will serve functions of in the final game. So just note that they may look different, but will serve the same purpose. In this game, each player is trying to captain their airship in order to build terrain, build things on that terrain, gather resources from the terrain, and of course score victory points. The goal being to score 40 victory points before your opponent by blasting them or building different things, or of course accomplishing pattern recognition things out in this terrain out here. So you'll be building terrain in order to try and build specific patterns. During the setup of the game, each player is going to draw a card from this deck over here, and hopefully they'll get a map card on their first draw, but if they don't, they'll keep drawing until they get one. These map cards show terrain patterns on them, so you can see a mountain, a plains, a water, and a forest on this terrain card. But if you make this exact pattern on the board at any point during the game, and you'll be building that board with modular tiles, you can fly there and score 4 victory points. So each player will start the game with one of those. Our other player here has a different one with a slightly different pattern that's also worth 4 victory points. You're also going to start the game with 5 workers, 3 potential settlements, your airship, a marker for combat victory points, your own ship, which has its own special ability. In this case, this one can actually hold 4 of these cards instead of the maximum of 3 usually. And this one can move a space for free every turn. And you're going to start with 2 tiles that you'll have to place out on the board to start the modular board. So, once we're all set up, each player will have to place their 2 tiles out on the board in turn order. So, maybe the green player places these out like this. They look at their card. There's really not much they can do aside from place them next to each other, so they go out like that. And then the yellow player will set theirs up, and they'll look and see what they have. So they need a mountain next to a plains, and then they need a plains across from that. So maybe they put this mountain next to this plains here. So they have the card oriented a little bit like this, and then they put this plains right here. And they're a good portion of the way towards building what they need, as long as they can get a water spot right there and fly to it. So, and then they place their player piece out like this. After this is all set up, each player is going to take turns, taking, of course, their turn. In order to do this, they're going to be placing their workers out onto their airship, which is represented by this board. Now, placement takes place over 3 phases, really. You can place all of your workers at the same time, but they activate over 3 phases, being green, yellow, and red. And you'll see there are color-coded spots on the ship that correspond to these phases. So, for example, during the green phase, you can pilot your ship or you can attack. You can blast ground, which is destroying some of the terrain out on the board in order to hopefully rearrange it later. And, of course, you have more attack spots at the back of your ship. While in the yellow phase, you can, exit your ship in order to go out onto the terrain that's already built and gather some resources, which you'll need later for building different settlements. And it's the same action for building settlements. Once you have 2 of each resource, gold, stone, and wood, you can send out 4 of your workers in order to build a settlement, which will be 10 points. In the red phase, you'll be preparing for your next turn or for future parts of the game. So you have the scouting action, which is drawing tiles from this bag. For each time you place a guy in a scouting action, you'll draw 2 tiles, which you will have to place at the start of your next turn. Or you can take the research action up to 3 times, which is drawing more cards from this deck. Now, when you draw cards from this deck, they could be more map cards, which, of course, give you different patterns that you'll try and make out on the board. Or they could be, with a little bit of searching, a development card, which is going to change the properties of your ship for better, or can be sold for resources. So this one here is Improved Study. You can hold up to 4 map cards in your hand, which is, of course, the same ability as the green ship. So they'd probably sell that for the 1 resource that it would give them to put onto their ship. Each ship also has 4 cargo holds, 1 for food, 1 for gold, 1 for stone, and 1 for wood, that can hold up to 4 each of those resources, and it has a track down here to keep track of how many times you've hit your opponent at least 3 times in a turn, which is worth 5 victory points. So on a player's turn, they're trying to, of course, score victory points, and they need to get to 40 before their opponent. So what they're going to do is they're going to take their 5 workers, and they're going to start placing those on their ship in order to accomplish stuff. So, for example, placing on the piloting action will allow you to move your ship up to 3 spaces, getting it where you want it to be. So maybe they move to here, which gives them a range or availability of all of these different tiles from which they could gather resources on. It also moves them adjacent to the yellow ship, which is important for the next action that can be done in the green phase, which is attacking. So maybe our player here places 2 workers on attack. This actually gives them 2 options. They can either attack the other ship twice, rolling a die to see if they succeed, and they only succeed on 4, 5s, and 6s, or they can take 1 guaranteed hit on the opponent's ship. What this does is they could say that they're targeting, for example, a scouting area, and it would put a damage marker on that scouting area, making it unavailable for the other player to use until they repair it by simply placing a worker there, but not getting the action for it. So, a guaranteed hit, of course, lets you automatically damage 1 spot. But dealing a damage by rolling a die is a little bit riskier, but you could deal 2 damage with the same amount of workers. So, they would say, I'm targeting a scouting area, and they would roll. And in this case, they hit, so 5 is a hit to the scouting area. In response, the other player could, of course, counterattack, and they would be able to place as many workers as they wanted to counterattack. And they would, likewise, shoot back at the other ship. So, they've kind of broadsided each other, and now they're firing back and forth, trying to damage each other's ship. So now the yellow player would choose somewhere on the opponent's ship, maybe they choose a research spot, and they attack and they miss. And then, of course, back and forth with each player's workers that have been placed, trying to damage the other player's ship. The reason you may want to do this frequently is that for each time you manage to deal 3 damage to an opponent's ship on your turn, you get 5 VP. So you get 1 combat VP on the track, which is worth 5 VP for the game. So that's one way to get towards your 40 victory points. After the green phase, well, actually, let's cover the last action in the green phase. If you were to have 3 workers that you wanted to use, you could blast ground. Placing all 3 workers on this spot is the only way to activate it. But what it lets you do is it lets you remove one of the terrain tiles around you that's not occupied. So if green wanted to, they could destroy this green tile out here. So they'd look at their thing. They actually kind of want green tile out there next to a yellow, so they decide not to do that. But they could theoretically destroy a tile from the board in order to hopefully place a different tile there later to help accomplish one of their map tiles. After the green phase, you're going to have some workers left. Maybe you piloted and you attacked once. And you can use these workers in the yellow phase. The yellow phase only has 1 action, and that is exiting the ship. When you place workers on here, they actually don't stay there. They go out to the terrain tiles, and they can only go out to terrain tiles that are adjacent or directly underneath your airship. So I could send a worker out here and maybe send another worker out to the green tile here. What this will let me do is gather resources. So from the mountain area, I will have a die that lets me gather resources, and the same is true for the forest area. On the mountain die, you can either get a stone, you can get a gold, which is on one of the sides here, or if you're lucky, you can get a gold and a stone. So you would roll this and see what you get. I got a stone, and I would take that, and I'd place it on my storage area for stone. The same would be true of my guy in the woods. He can get food, which is turkey, he can get a wood, or he can get both. So if he rolls it, he got a wood. Now, each of those is just resources, but the turkey legs, when you get them, are actually a resource that lets you re-roll dice. So at any point, if you don't like the result of your die roll, you can discard this in order to re-roll that die. Alternatively, if you had 4 workers left and you already had 2 wood, 2 stone, and 2 gold, you could place all 4 of those workers on the exit spot. And what this would do, it would allow you to take those 4 workers out onto a tile and essentially build one of your settlements. These have to be built on plains. They have to be unoccupied plains, so you could build this out here if you were on the right spot. And what that would do is give you 10 victory points. In addition, at the start of each of your turns, you can choose a terrain tile around that in order to roll a die and hopefully get the resources. Or you could simply take the turkey leg that you could get for being on plains. So plains only generate turkey legs, whereas forests generate wood or turkey legs. The mountains generate stone or gold or both. And the water generates fish, or they generate stone or both. Sorry, fish or gold or both. So each type of terrain has a different benefit in terms of the resources that you can gather from it. After the yellow phase, which could either be gathering those resources or building your different settlements out there, comes the red phase, and this is basically where you're preparing for the next turn or the rest of the game. So you could scout, for example. Scouting is drawing more tiles from this bag. And you would reach in, and for each time you scouted, you'd draw 2 tiles. And those would have to be placed at the start of your next turn in order to expand the board and hopefully change the map orientation of the map constituents so that you could finish your tiles. And when you want to finish the map cards, you actually have to fly to a space on that map card. So, for example, if I made this pattern, I could fly to the plains or the water or the forest or the mountain and show that I've completed that pattern and score the victory points. So for each scout, you get 2 of those tiles that you'll place on your next turn. For each of the researches, you're going to draw another card, and if it's a map card, you'll add it to your hand, whereas if it's one of those development cards, you can either add it to your ship to get the benefits, or you can sell it for the resources and place them on your ship. In this manner, you're going to be trying to navigate around the board, collect resources, fight your opponents, damage their ship, and of course build your settlements in order to be the first player to get to 40 victory points, and whoever does that the best with their pattern recognition will be the winner. One last thing I wanted to cover is the purpose of fish in the game. So you'll saw that I had a fish resource, but I did not mention anything about it. Accumulating fish from the water spaces that I have yet to put out on the board, but are available in the bag, is going to give you a resource you can consume up to 3 times a turn in order to take an additional action with one of your workers. So maybe you've already placed this worker to pilot, but you want to use him later to exit the ship. Consuming a fish would allow you to relocate him, exit him from the ship, and of course gather resources, or use him to build a settlement, or I guess they call them townships in the game, and score victory points. So that's the purpose of fish, basically accumulating more actions in order to further your position in the game. Well, there you have it. That is Fantasy Frontier from Gamelin Games, a game for 2 to 4 players of flying airships around, of pattern recognition, of fighting, and all kinds of various different mechanics. Basically, the game is going to be a race to 40 victory points, but you can, try and do it through building settlements, or you can try and do it through combat and preventing your opponent from doing things. You can try and do it by building terrains and having pattern recognition on the board. And I think if you're really strong with pattern recognition, or if you like pattern recognition, this is a game that does that very well. You can kind of build the board up, destroy the board a little bit, hopefully rearrange the board to your own benefits, and all at the same time try and mess with what your opponent is doing out on the board in order to try and prevent them from doing the same thing. So if any of this sounds good to you, if it all sounds good to you, or even a part of it sounds good, I suggest you check out their Kickstarter project. They're up now. They're looking for support. They have all types of different things going on, different levels to pledge at, and hopefully you can find a game that you'll really enjoy and love to play.
Thanks for watching our review today. For more information about board games, as well as the #1 board game audio podcast, check out Dicetower.com for reviews, interviews, and more. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.